Jerry, why we do what we do?
My book goes from the physiological to psychological to spiritual or metaphysical, if we want to use that term. And in the physiological realm, the idea that we're conditioned to do whatever we're doing is part of that unfoldment, that physiological growth and unfoldment from the single cell organism up through the human being. And I think if we accept this conditioned experience, the one from our earliest memories, we can see that we don't come into life as a blank slate. We know that every little baby have a personality. So they're carrying something with them. But that idea of me, trying to find who that me is, combined with all the memory, science is beginning to see that the idea of me is wrapped up in memory. And so those conditioned experiences start to dictate our behavior. And it takes a while before we get to that point where we think about the self, the deeper self. But until that point, we're working on this concept of a rudimentary who am I? It's Eric Fromm, the psychologist who was very spiritual himself. He said it's primary narcissism. Like the baby doesn't know anything but itself and its sustenance, then going to the mom. And as it grows to the family, one extends itself to the tribe, nation, religion, etc. But that deep sense of self, it goes beyond memory. But all it knows for a good part of his life or her life is memory. And it equates that sense of self or identity with its memory. The same reason we call ourselves what we do. I'm a musician, I'm an artist, and whatever you do, you tend to respond to the question, what are you? You say what you do. Particularly men do that. Traditionally, it's been men because they're wrapped up in their ego sense of what they do and their accomplishment. But, why we do it, that's all part of conditioned experiences. So I'll just leave it there through the psychological, physiological, psychological part of what I wrote in the book. But that's essentially it.
If you are a gardener and you put an apple seed into the soil for it to grow, it's not possible for it to turn into a peach tree or a grapevine. It can only become an apple seed. So, could you give tangible benefits of knowing who we are and where we're going?
That's a good question. Yeah. The fact that we are going to be an apple because we're an apple seed or peach and whatever we're going to become. And there's a certain trajectory for that and conditioned experiences that reinforce that reality for us. I think the idea of knowing it takes a long time because we're told when we're children, especially in the West and especially in America, you can be anything you want to be. You have teachers, parents, the whole society is telling a child that you can be anything you want to be. And basically, we're lying to the child. They can't be anything they want to be. If you're only 4'5", you're probably never going to be in the NBA basketball team. It's just not in the cards for you to do that. So I think this idea that you being the best human being you can be and you developing in that way is the way we should be teaching children. And of course, encourage them. Try all the things you want to try. But in that process, we allow the child to unfold, to look at their talents. What are you particularly gifted at? And that gives them some clues at what maybe they can make a living in, because they're going to have to make a living at some point. But those deeper senses of that you are conscious awareness and your deepest self, that's down the road for most kids, unless they've had some sort of spiritual experience when they're very young. But that idea of becoming, to me, is part of the universal experience. We are in the process of becoming. And so, whether you're becoming an apple or an orange or whatever you're becoming, encouraging you to do your very best is to me extremely important.
Like the apple tree as well, when it grows through different season from the spring to summer to fall and the winter. Humans also go through those cycles because we are part of nature. Also might be more challenging because we're more intelligent, and sometimes that intelligent works against us. Since you're so old and experienced, what would you say to those parents that have young kids and are just starting their journeys?
That's an excellent question also, because when we become a parent, especially if we're young, the desire to prove ourselves as a good parent is very powerful. It's an identity in and of itself that we're parents and we're going to be a good parent. My kid is going to learn to read by the time he's 3 years old. And people brag about that sort of thing. Child's accomplishments very young and they want to do as much as possible. But I think the feeling of what is important for the child comes late with parents. And it did with me also. I can't pretend to be something I was not when I was a young parent. And I think this idea that started probably centuries ago, but the idea that the child should be a good person, that you grow up to be kind, you grow up to be caring about others. It takes a back seat many times in our cultures before we get to that point. There was a book years ago. It was called Everything I Needed to Learn, I Learned in Kindergarten. And it was the essence of what we need to learn as a child and even as an adult. Uh, didn't talk about having to read and write and do math and all that. It basically talked about how to be kind, how to be caring with your fellow classmates in kindergarten, how to hold hands when you cross the street, how to enhance your humanity as well as those of your friends and classmates. To me, that was important. If parents could reinforce that, we'd have those essentials that we carry with us into adulthood. Instead, we have competitiveness and who's going to make more money, who's going to be better at this, and so on. And we put the most important things on the back burner.
So people focus on achievements, and I think that's very true. But also, since they focus on getting achievements and they do it from perspective of luck and want, it's actually put more separation between them and their goals and achievements. And it's not even known if those achievements will suit them. If I could compare it using analogy, it's like playing video games. Some people focus on having the best character, yet some people that are really good in the game focus on being the best player possible. What do you think about that?
There are two senses of identity, right? In the sense that the best player possible and the achieving the goal of the video game. It's almost in life. We wear a mask often, several masks. Right? It's like Shakespeare said it many centuries ago that all the world's a stage and we're actors upon it. We have our entrances and exits and we play many parts. And I think this is similar. We can play a part as something and focus on playing the part, where we can focus on the achievement, the essence of what the game is about. And I think depending on the maturation, the maturity of the player, we're either focusing on playing the part or doing what the game is dictating that we should be doing. In life and in a game, we see both things happening at the same time. The players who are actors in their own way, but we tend to admire the person who knows how to play the game well. There's in music, I was a musician most of my life. There were musicians I know who were adequate players. They could perform to, I would say, an average level, but they played the part in a way that you would think they played much better than they did because they were doing an act. and they perform as if they were playing very well, but in fact, they weren't playing very well. But you'd get someone else who didn't try to play the part, but tried to play the music. So eventually you could see that the music was coming right through this other person. They were a vehicle for the music. The other person was constantly ego centered about what he looked like playing the part, for
Mm.
example.
So, do you think that is due to the self image we have of us and it's impacting how we react with others and our environment? Or do you think it's a belief thing? Because if I know I can do it, I'm going to do it and I'm not going to allow my thoughts or emotions to interfere with the process.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think if we say, I'm going to do it and I know I can do it, um, that can come from different parts of ourselves, right? I could have my ego saying that I can do this. I'm sure I can do it. And I'm going to put myself into that. And there's an ego drive, which wants self gratification from the process. The other part of it is you allow it to come through you as an awakening experience. And I think obviously the ego enhancement is not doing you very much good. It's just ego enhancing to do it. You become proud of yourself for doing it. But that other perspective, one that says, I want this to come through me. I'm trying to identify with this body, this mind organism that I'm inhabiting right now, but I would rather have the purity of the message come out. And to me, that in almost every field we can think about, I think is the essence of how we should approach it. Now, how we should is a funny word, right? The should only comes through us either from the ego or from our deeper self. If we're still working on the ego sense of self, then it's only for our own particular enhanced from money, from position, all that business, even from accomplishment. But if that's coming through us from a deeper space, then to me, we're fulfilling our particular mission in our lives, whatever that might be.
For someone from the audience that is hearing about this for the first time, it's about ego based actions and about actions from deep within, when you allow that action to just flow through you, could you share more light about those two perspectives?
I realized that I had played this part for decades. I loved music, I loved teaching. And when I started playing music, there was an escape to it because I grew up in a family that was pretty dysfunctional, and playing music offered me an escape as well as a joy in playing the music. When I got into it, I was really escaping my background. So it wasn't so much I was allowing the music to come through me, I was using it as a vehicle to get away from my environment. And I think we have all reasons that we do whatever we do. Some of them are directly ego based. In other words, I want you to be proud of me. And it goes back to mommy and daddy. Look, mom, no hands. Just kind of riding the bicycle and I can do a trick. And you want your mother to be proud of you. And so you accomplish things because you want your parents, your friends, your society to be proud of you. And that's an ego centered thing. Doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just the process we're going through. And that gives us the energy to do it at that time in our existence. But eventually, you have to say, is there something deeper in this process that I'm supposed to learn or I can learn from the process itself? And to me, that's a turning point. And it doesn't come constantly. It comes, at least to the people I know and to myself, it came at little sparks. There was in music, for example, I felt like I wasn't doing the playing. I was not the doer. It was just coming through me, but I couldn't claim credit. I had technique and I used my hands to facilitate what was happening. but I was not the creator. It was just coming through me. Therefore, I couldn't take much credit for it. So it wasn't very ego enhancing. I was just extremely grateful for the capacity to do that. And so gratitude took the place of ego pride. And it gradually became more of a presence for me in my life than the ego sense. Not that the ego sense went away. It was still there reminding me, oh, you did the practice, you did the work, and you deserve the credit. The only thing I can say is that at this point in my life, I don't take credit for much of anything. I feel I'm just grateful. So if I'm able to do anything, I just try to be grateful for the fact that I'm doing it, but it's really coming through me. I think it's very hard to get when you're young because we're so wrapped up in trying to make a living. We're trying to do these things that are going to be survival skills for us. And just the process of doing that gives a sense of satisfaction, usually ego satisfaction at that time.
We're all trapped in a rat race and we're just chasing and running things so fast that we don't have time to even think if that makes sense. And that takes some kind of awakening to be open to those possibilities. And I do believe that all of us are sparks of this great big soul called God or the universe that is using us as its vessel to experience itself. And
Yes. Mhm.
since this game of chess called life would require rules to ensure that we don't know that, because if we would, all of us would be aware of that fact, the game would be pointless. In chess, you need pawns, you need your bishop, your rooks, you need all different types of figures for the game to make sense, for the game of life to be the same.
Absolutely.
And the one that it makes different is that all of us don't recall that, and all of us are different, and all of us have this ego thing created by the mind that is trying to be us, but it's not us. And it seems that is this thing that the mind has created for us so we do not experience pain or trauma or those events that are bigger in life. And if there's an event in our life that is bigger than us and we're not able to cope with it right there, there's going to be emotional response that we're going to put in a black little box and hide it very deep within our body. And so the brain doesn't want us to feel pain. So each time we will stumble upon the box, it would create a coping mechanism for the box not to be opened. And that would result in us having those masks. And the more masks we have, the more boxes we carry, the more tired we are. It's like going for a hike on a Sunday morning and packing all the heavy stuff, barbells, dumbbells in your backpack and thinking somehow it would make your journey easier.
That's very true. Pack as much as you can. Right.
Yes. And this journey called life, when you are able, as you say, to take this action from within, or what I call having an empty mind, like an empty cup can be filled. But if your head is full of ideas, you will only be thinking about the past because your future can only be created from your past experiences. So you will be stuck in this loop, like they call karma. I used to say a dog bite a man. So a man is afraid of dogs. Dog can sense a man is afraid of him. So he bites him. And that is a never ending loop. Like when you are a hamster running on a wheel cog, it doesn't really matter if you run left or right, you're still gonna be in that loop. Do you have anything to say for the people that are in those loops, that carry the masks and they are so heavy, they experience pain, but yet it is not at the trigger point for where they actually start asking the big questions?
I find myself both with friends, my family, acquaintances, in that difficult position if I'm not completely in a mindfulness state of meditation, for example. Then I'm trying to figure out something to say to the person in front of me who may be trapped in this loop. And you can see that the person is trapped in the loop and you would like to help them. And your rational mind starts thinking of, I should say this to them. Maybe this would help if I say this to them. And we're constantly being connected with their loop by putting us in our own loop. And so I feel like, I think it's Rumi. He said, and I have a quote in yesterday, I was clever and I tried to change the world. Today I am wise and I'm changing myself. And in that saying, I think if we remind ourselves in the interaction, in the process of the interaction, can I let go of my particular need to change the person, even to help the person? Even if I perceive, oh, if I could send something to this person to help them get out of their loop, that would be a good thing. But I believe if we're absolutely present as much as possible, that we can be with that person and allow that same inner voice from us to speak, then that person will hear whatever they need to hear and whatever they're capable of listening to. If I do it from my perspective, I have all kinds of thoughts that come to say, I should say this to this person, when in fact, it may be birds flying overhead. They're not going to get what I'm thinking. Instead, they'll either ignore it or might even feel negative about what I say.
Mm.
But if I allow that part of me to fall by the wayside and just be present with this person, try to really meditate on the person and only open my mouth if I need to. Sometimes I know you've experienced it that sometimes the best thing to do is just be silent and listen to the person. And that's the best thing we can do in that moment. But the discernment of the moment and what we need to do in the moment is our problem, right? That's our issue to deal with, not theirs. It's our issue. So should I be silent? Should I say something? Let me just speak in a way that they will listen for coming from the deepest part of me that says what to say essentially. Or maybe it's
If a person is operating in ego mode, he won't understand the soul, so you can
right,
only reach them by the ego. But the problem is, or maybe the beauty is, that everything between heaven and earth is perfect,
right.
and that means flowers bloom in due time. And if you need to use ego or eloquent word to reach that person, and maybe that person even understands you, but yet he was not ready. I
Right.
believe all of us are born on a different level of understanding. And if you take away the possibility for that person to find it on his own or on her own, and you take away that experience from them, it's like forcing a flower to bloom. It's being a barbarian, and God punishes that. And I would call it a sin because if everything is perfect between heaven and earth, why exactly am I looking to help this person? Am I trying to help myself by helping that person? If so, that means it is very egoistic and my intention aren't as pure as I thought because I'm doing it for myself.
I think we all do it to ourselves, right? Because this is our own journey of awakening. I feel like I'm catching myself more when I'm doing it. There was a point when I was, I suppose, still really struggling where I would not catch myself and I'd have to look back much later and say, I shouldn't have said that. This was my own ego enhancement that I was doing this for. And I would have to analyze it. And I say, I can't pretend I'm much further along. Occasionally, I'm still making those fumbling mistakes. But as you said, everything is perfect between heaven. We hear because it was meant for me to make the mistake so I could see it. That mistake was really just a growth opportunity for me to see, no, you didn't help that person. You just enhanced your ego by showing what you know. But really, that person did benefit from what you said. So I think those experiences are simply our experiences in the midst of imperfect perfection, if you want to say that. We're imperfect, but this perfection is really catching us where we need to be to understand.
So mistakes are bound to happen because that's one of the way you can learn and grow. And I agree with that 100%. What I wanted to ask, you mentioned something about awareness and mindfulness. For the people that are listening to this podcast, what would you say are the most important thing when it comes to awareness?
I can only talk for myself because the greatest moment, I suppose, when I was young and had moments that I didn't realize I was meditating. I had no understanding of meditation, but I was suddenly, for a brief moment, being aware of everything around and the beauty of everything around me. And it was only for a brief moment, but I never forgot this. I didn't understand the feeling. I didn't understand the connection I was having with everything. It just was a wonder. I realized I was in a different state of consciousness. It's not that everybody has that experience, but it's a beautiful one if you can have it. And I know people talk about psychedelics. When I was young, I took psychedelics and they opened a certain door for me. And I appreciated that. But I don't believe this is something you need to depend on. I think if the person looks for transcendence, if they think about transcending their normal life and what's beyond this thing we hold on to called life in the sense of our physicality, is there some other awareness that we can touch? Then, if they learn to meditate, if they learn even mindfulness meditation, without going deeper than that, then they will get a little bit of it. And other ways to do it. There's places in nature, there's music, there's the arts, there's a level of concentration where you go into a state of flow, where you transcend the normal state of consciousness and you're lifted up, you're granted, I would say, a moment of grace where you are taken above this normal sense of awareness and taken above for a moment. If you are aware of that moment, then you could say, I touched the hem of the garment of consciousness. And if you do that, you will never, ever forget it. I know you've done this, and many people have done this. Some people, of course, have spontaneous awakenings that are powerful. Great masters, many of them had those things. But I think for the average person, there are these little mini states of awakening, little tiny ones that give them a taste, a little taste that wants to move them forward to try and taste it again. So I think that if the person is awake enough to hear what we're saying in this conversation, then I think they can move in that direction and have that sense.
What do you think would be value that you can receive from having those experiences? How it can impact your day to day life for someone that has yet not done it?
I couldn't speak for individuals. I would say I can only look at my own experience, those and some people who have been close to me. And I think it's just little sparks. My son talked to me the other day, and he said he has these little sparks where they're uplifting and everything is clear. And it's not a mind game that he's playing, but just there's some clarity that he can touch on, and then it goes away. And he would like, of course, to have those happen more often. But I think that's where our experiences need to go in a direction where we allow them to happen more often. Um, and I don't even say we are deliberately doing one thing or another, but we might not be conscious of what we need to do in that period that we're going through. So I know if people meditate, they have those experiences more because they're focused on transcendence. But if we're not there yet, if we don't understand it, then it's going to take,
But all journeys start with the first step,
right?
and
Right.
the goal of the journey is not the end. If you think life is a race, do you really want to be the first on the finish line?
There's that you may have read it, the story in I don't believe it was the Olympics, but it was a major race, and one fellow uh, was winning the race, and there was somebody behind him. I think he was Spanish, and it was a person from Africa who was winning the race. And he thought he had gotten to the end where the finish was, and he just stopped. And he was confused as to the direction he was going to go. And he just kept looking around. The fellow behind him and pushed him forward and said, "Go, it's not over." And everyone, reporters afterwards, because the African fellow won the race thanks to the Spanish fellow, they all asked him, "Why did you do that? You could have just passed them and won this race." And he said, "But what would my mother think of me if I did that?" I
Mm.
thought it was wonderful. He was thinking he had to be an ethical person more than winning the race, he had to be an ethical person. And so this is such a great step, right? Above just winning another race. He taught a lesson practically to the world about your desire to finish the race, your desire to beat the other people. But no, he wanted to be an ethical person more than he wanted to win the race. What a beautiful example.
Beautiful story from a beautiful human. I'm afraid our time is running off. Jerry, could you tell us to the audience where they can find you?
Yeah. My website is jerrypanone.com. And if you have any questions or you just want to contact me, you could just go under the contact drop down and write a note. And I'd be happy to hear from you and answer any questions you might have or just have a contact. That would be great. I have book is on Amazon, but that's not important. The information is on my website. So love to hear from anyone.
The link to the book and to Jerry page is down below. Thank you all for listening. As always, stay tuned for another episode.
Thanks very much.